With Season 2 inbound, many hoquenna teams began to actually consider long-term strategy. Drafts, trades, and more. The league began to feel more like a league, and less like a loose collection of, well, teams. The Sarholm Crowns would attempt to run it back and sign with many of the same stars they have, with the addition of Preuze Lions and other defensive strongmen. Meanwhile, the Crusaders had a rough offseason, making a series of silly mistakes that prevented them from actually being a solid cup contender. Now, when most teams only win one game in a season, the press would be hounding them all over. But for Vurgos, this didn't happen. People didn't really expect much from them. Most teams respond to disasters, especially huge ones like, I don't know, a terrible season with change. New systems, new philosophies maybe. Sometimes even competence is all that you need. Unless you're Cuive, then, well, maybe not. But the Vurgos Vortex chose something, well, simpler. They added players who could just reliably arrive on time. The Vortex held the first overall selection in the Season 2 draft. Now, this was not an honor, it was documentation. Proof that, statistically speaking, nobody had been worse. Nobody could be worse. It was a big, shining, "we suck" trophy. With that pick, Vurgos selected Tita Manalo, a stay-at-home defenseman whose scouting reports shared a common theme. Excellent on her best nights, and concerning on the others. Tita played hoquenna like the weather. Sometimes she was immovable. Sometimes she was unpredictable. Often both within the same shift, and she'd piss you off just as much as she'd win you over. Still, she immediately became the most stable defensive presence the Vortex had ever employed, which is less an insult and more a statement of historical record. Even when she was bad, she was better than the Vortex ever knew, and the fans loved her for it. The second round brought Helena Casderos. She played one game, recorded 0 points, and was traded to the Cuive Crusaders shortly afterward, becoming the first Vortex draft pick to complete an entire career arc in under a week. She wouldn't do much better on the Crusaders either, and would eventually resign, never to play again, arguably for the best. Third-round selection Chloe Noirim never even wore the jersey at all, which, considering Season 1, technically maintained team tradition now that I think about it. And then, near the end of the draft, when selections were beginning to expire and teams were choosing mostly on hope, Vurgos picked an unknown rookie. No accolades, no elite development history. He'd never even watched a hoquenna game before, just experience in high school hockey and a willingness to do what it takes. Cuusco Fauso. At the time, the selection barely registered. History would later disagree. You might not know it now, and in all honesty, he doesn't really look like much. Sort of like an off-brand Chinese knockoff Jeff Goldblum, or Cardinal Tedesco. But Cuusco Fauso would be undeniably, inarguably, and undoubtedly the best player to ever lace up the skates. The Vurgos Vortex don't know it yet either, but they've just picked up an unstoppable force and an immovable object. We'll talk more about him later. Durkos Atlas would re-sign with the Vurgos Vortex, and with Rora Permara now taking over in net from a retired Yakos Manalo, a new defenseman in Rafe Manalo on the blue line from the Preuze Lions, Michele Permara finally had a team with players who could actually show up. For the first time in franchise history, the Vortex possessed something resembling a roster. What he planned to do with it remained unclear. Season 2 would begin with the season opener between the Vurgos Vortex and the Preuze Lions. And it was heavily expected that the Lions, despite missing the now retired superstar Camilla Telesal, would apply the same beating the Crowns routinely did. But it didn't happen. The Lions, who by contrast played a physically dominant game last season, played a much more polished, strategic game against the Vortex, who began in turn to show some life on the attack. Yamos Atlas for the Preuze Lions would score, and it would be answered by rookie Cuusco Fauso, and the game went into halftime tied at 1 each. Ricaros Manalo for the Lions would score to retake the lead, but Cuusco Fauso, in his first AHI game ever, would score 2 more and secure a 3-2 win for the Vurgos Vortex, and a hat trick in his inaugural game. For the first time in the history of hoquenna, the Vurgos Vortex were the best team in the league. Okay, obviously, only one game's been played. And nobody saw it that way either. Everyone saw it as a scheduled win. It has to happen eventually. If they can beat the Sarholm Crowns on the other hand, well, that would make it different. And then they did. July 7th, 2025. Played at the newly minted Sarholm Gardens, the Crowns, with the Emperor in attendance to boot, were excited to partake in a historical thrashing that would be told for generations. But the game was close. Really close. 4-3 to be precise. Sarholm held on, despite fiery and borderline unsportsmanlike comments by Vurgos winger Cuusco Fauso, baiting and getting in the heads of the Crowns. Crowns rookie Emily Manalo would score alongside Valera Atlas, and the Vortex would fight back. Cuusco Fauso would do yet another hat trick against the Crowns, easily bypassing Crowns goaltender Belbata Legion, and Vurgos Atlas would score one, his first as the captain of the team. The Vortex shocked the nation, and they'd continue to do so as time went on. Vurgos would keep winning games. They played the Preuze Lions next, which after an intense back and forth with goals by Rafe Manalo and Vurgos Atlas, the game went to overtime. But despite 21 minutes of game time, a champion had yet to be declared, and so for the first time in AHI history, a shootout will occur. Vurgos Atlas scores in the shootout, and Vurgos continues its winning streak as everyone begins to wonder, what exactly is going on? Vurgos would play Cuive next, and the game would be tight and physical. The Crusaders were so close to winning too. For the first time in Crusaders history, the team was leading halfway through the second half. But Vurgos captain Vurgos Atlas, assisted by who other than Cuusco Fauso, was able to tie the game halfway through the second half. The tie wouldn't last for long either. First-rounder Tita Manalo, with her first-ever AHI goal, put the Vortex up in the waning seconds of the game, and the deflated Crusaders crumbled when Vurgos Atlas was able to seal the game, ending it 3-1. The game ended in a huge brawl in the locker room between both teams, and suspensions were almost issued. Vurgos would beat Cuive again shortly, and the story was more of the same. The Crusaders were putting up a great fight, and with Vortex's coaching staff missing, allegedly stuck in traffic, the Crusaders took good advantage of it and took a late lead of 5-3. As is tradition with the Season 2 Vortex, late fourth-rounder Cuusco Fauso was able to complete a hat trick, 2 shorthanded goals to tie the game at 5 each, and a third dagger to win the game in overtime. But the eyes on this game weren't remotely as close to the eyes on the next game, when the Vurgos Vortex took on the Sarholm Crowns again. The match was brutal. The Crowns, at the Robert Lyons Center and in front of an ever-growing crowd of Vortex fans, saw a great start as Maros Leon and Jerome Kane put the Crowns up 3-0 until Cuusco Fauso was able to reduce the lead to 2. The Vortex were in trouble, and they knew it, with the score standing at 3-1. While the Crowns had a much stronger team dynamic, the Vortex players seemed unable to work together in the face of it, with their dominant offense crumbling as the Crowns players on the ice repeatedly skated around and through them. The Vortex were turning on each other, and Vurgos Atlas began screaming at his own goalie. Fights broke out everywhere. It was chippy. For a moment, maybe longer, the ghosts of Hoquenna past came back. Season 1 Vurgos was again on the ice, but that would change. The second half was much more evenly matched than the first. Vurgos Atlas, Tita Manalo, and Rafi Manalo would each score a goal, and Emily Manalo would put the Crowns up to tie at 4-4. The game looked like it might go to overtime, and then Emily Manalo, in the waning seconds, scored 5-4. Crowns win. The Crowns celebrate. Telempere even said they went bar hopping throughout Vurgos afterwards. But for the Vortex, it was much worse. A huge fight broke out in the locker room. Team captain Vurgos Atlas began yelling at his players. Mikhail Primara, GM and coach, couldn't contain it. Cuusco Fauso lashed out, fighting everyone, arguing. Tita Manalo desperately tried to stop it. The arguing continued into the late hours of the night, and it seemed the Vurgos reign of terror, the very one that looked so strong early in the season, was coming to a close. And it was. Sort of. The Preuze Lions would beat the Vortex in their next game in overtime, 4-3. Tide Manalo put up an impressive 2 goals, and Vurgos Atlas played quite possibly the worst game of his life. Notably, however, Cuusco Fauso was benched by the Vortex coach, for reasons unknown to this day. What began as a benching for one game would actually reveal itself to be a benching for the entire season, until cooler heads prevailed and the Vortex would return their star winger to the lineup. The season for the Vortex would not be over yet, though. They'd beat the Cuive Crusaders at the inaugural opening of the Cuive Arena 5-3 after Vurgos Atlas fought Matos Kane, Cuive forward, and was suspended for yelling at the referee. Fauso and both Manalos would put up a good fight, and yet another Vortex hat trick by Cuusco Fauso would give Vurgos another win, as both the Vortex and the Crowns raced for season champions. The Vortex would beat the Crowns again at the Gardens, which led to some Crowns fans believing the Gardens themselves were cursed. Would you believe it or not? I guess you should ask them this season if they think that's still true. As seen so often, a Cuusco Fauso hat trick led to the Crowns losing 4-2, and the Vortex 1 point out of top place with 15 points to the Crowns' 16, but with a game in hand. The Vortex would beat the Lions and retake first with 10 games played, but would fall to the Crusaders in a shootout in the very next game, giving them a critical overtime loss point. And then, the season closer. Crowns and Vortex. All this trauma, all this struggle, all this hardship, and the Vortex are finally on the verge of winning something. Granted, it's not the Pulowa Cup, but the Memorial Cup, the trophy for best regular season team. Winner takes all. If the Crowns win, the Vortex go home as bridesmaids yet again. If the Vortex win, they prove they're ready for the playoffs. The crowd is pumped. Sarholm Gardens. It's loud and it's rocking. The Emperor is in the building. Over 10% of the entire population of Graal is here, in this building, and ready to watch. Cuusco Fauso, Vurgos Atlas, Tita Manalo. Wait, where's the coach? Wait, where's the goddamn goalie? Rora Permara and her husband Michaeli Permara were nowhere to be found. They stalled and stalled and stalled, waiting for a sign, and the Vortex netminder never came. They'd have to do it alone. Vurgos and Tita would score back-to-back goals, and a third shorthanded goal by the former would keep the Vortex in the fight, while it seemed Vurgos rookie star Fauso played more defense, making remarkable last-minute saves in the empty net. The game was tied after the first half despite the missing Vurgos goalie, and in the locker room, Cuusco Fauso and Belbata Legion almost exchanged blows. Cuusco Fauso was able to put one more in the Sarholm net, but the overwhelming offensive power of the Crowns began to finally wear down the Vurgos defense, and for the first time, the Crowns had defeated the Vurgos Vortex at home in Sarholm Gardens. For Vurgos, it felt familiar, close, not enough, almost. Losers again, nothing to show for it. No banner, no trophy, and not even first in the league entering the Pulowa Cup Playoffs. But this time, despite the similarities, something was different. They were no longer just surviving hoquenna, they were shaping it. And perhaps for the first time in Vortex history, the playoffs felt less like an ending and more like a new beginning. Despite the loss, the playoffs would arrive, and the Vurgos Vortex would, this time, be ready.